This episode of This Agile Life has been brought to you by BrilliantAgile.com, providing Agile and Scrum training, consultancy, and personnel.
BrilliantAgile.com. Done right, it's brilliant.
Recorded on Tuesday, January 8th, 2013, in St. Louis, Missouri, This Agile Life, Episode 10, Magic Synergy. Welcome to This Agile Life, a podcast about what it's like to be agile in the real world. Joining me today are my co-hosts, Matt Corwell. Matt, how you doing tonight?
I'm excellent. How are you, John?
Good. How was racquetball?
Racquetball was fantastic.
Did you knock it out of the park? I guess that's not really a racquetball.
I ran into the wall several times.
That'd be bad in racquetball if you knocked it out of the park.
Right, in an enclosed room.
Yeah. Sometimes they have that loft area where you can knock it out of the... But that's still not good.
Yeah, that's not good.
That's not good. Okay. I won't mix my racquetball and baseball metaphors anymore. And Nate Mackey. Nate, how are you doing?
I'm doing just fine. I'm glad to be back.
Yeah, it's been a while. We're Matt and Nate both. We haven't had you guys in a while, but glad to have you back tonight. Well, I mean, Matt, I guess you were here, but we've been kind of shutting Nate out. Well, he's been busy, too.
Yeah, I have been. Timing has not worked, but this is good.
And Jason Tice is supposed to be joining us, but must be stuck in bridge traffic or something. So hopefully you'll hear the voice of Jason Tice a little bit later on.
Yep.
All right, well, while we're waiting, we'll go ahead and get started, and let's pull a discussion topic from our ready queue. And tonight we have Agile requirements. So we're going to talk a lot about how and why and who is involved in doing Agile requirements. And this is kind of near and dear to my heart lately because I've had the job of doing some requirements work for a project, and it's just been top of my mind. So I thought it'd be a good time to talk about some of this stuff and see what you guys all think about Agile requirements. So just starting from the beginning with how to get requirements, what do you guys think? What's the best way to go about eliciting requirements from users?
Yeah, I always feel funny calling it requirement gathering. It feels so waterfall to call it that because, you know, back in the waterfall day, that was this process where you just went around making this huge list from everybody who had some interest in the application, gathering it all together at once until you had all the ones that you needed so that you could start breaking them down and categorizing them and designing your system. So it always feels a little funny to me, but it is what you're doing. It's just that we're doing it in a different order and at a different level and doing it just in time, as we like to do in Agile a lot. So the important thing, one of the important things I would think is getting a good, strong voice of the customer, whoever that is for your project, because one of the most difficult issues you can run into with requirements gathering on an Agile project is having too many voices who are all saying different things. So trying to figure out who is your reliable voice of the customer, who's going to own the product, who's going to take responsibility for what gets built and the order it gets built is tremendously important.
Do you think more often than not the problem is too many voices or not enough?
Well, there's that too. That's a good point. I don't know. I see both. I guess, you know, in our experience, we end up working with a lot of customers who either are too busy or too unsure. Maybe they feel like software is out of their element and don't feel comfortable giving their requirements because they feel like the developers know better. But we've also had the problem with too many different people putting in their 2 cents about what needs to be done, and it can create chaos. So I guess I would rather have too few with a knowledgeable team that it can at least keep moving things forward while you try to pull out the requirements than having too many voices and having really no idea which direction you should go in.
Oh, that's interesting. I actually think I might prefer it the other way. Matt, what do you think?
I try not to most times, but I think that kind of like Nate said, we've seen both scenarios, and to me, having the small set of people who know what they're talking about it's a lot less noise, obviously, than having everybody having an opinion. But I can be kind of an extremist in my own personal views, to where the separation of, like, you said the waterfall style gathering the requirements. I'd really like to, be very obtuse, and I think it'd be fun to be involved in a project where you're the client and you said, I'd like a website with a page 1, and I give you page 1, and then I say I want page 1 to have a button, and then I give you a button, where there is no requirement. It's just this pure continuous flow kind of thing. I mean, that does come into, like you said, we need somebody to own the product and make sure that we're not just coding in circles.
Right.
But I would rather skip the requirements and just write something, I mean, and give it to you, and I show you something every day, and it's either it is or it isn't what you want. I mean,
well, I think ultimately you're getting the requirements. It's just when you're getting them, and you're waiting until the last responsible moment to get them and actually do something with them, and you're not trying to get too many at once.
Absolutely.
Right?
I want one and only one at a time.
Right.
And I mean, and then we'll see what the next one is when this one's done. But that may be extreme even in the most agile kind of circles.
I think it's okay to have many people providing input, as long as you have one person who's ultimately the decision maker and the responsible person to say, yes, we're going to do that, or not right now, we'll do that later. So if you have one strong owner, product owner, then it's okay to have many people providing input and feedback into what you're doing. But if you have no strong product owner and maybe multiple groups of people kind of competing for your attention and for their features to be put into the application, that's much, much more difficult.
So I guess I would say, as a takeaway from who's involved in requirements, the important thing for the people listening out there is that when you get started with one of these projects, really fight for that person who's going to be your product owner, who's going to ultimately make those decisions and filter out all of the noise of all the people that are the stakeholders and give you a solid, here's what needs to be done in the order it needs to be done. It means a lot to the team to be able to have that, and then make sure that person's actually going to stay involved and continue to give you input and not drop out at some point and just kind of leave you hanging. So it's really important, and I think it's something that teams can easily get started and assume it's okay if they don't have that, and then get along and realize they've wasted a lot of time doing something that's not going to be used.
There's a certain litmus test that I've used, Nate, and I wonder what you think about this. That if someone who's asking for a software development team to develop them a product, if that someone can't pony up a person to be responsible and accountable and be the product owner, then they aren't invested enough in the development of that product, and therefore it's not worth doing.
It's a valid question to ask. I think the situations that you run into where that happens, that I've seen, are when the mandate is coming from either the government or from some kind of rule somewhere that they have to do something. So there's a rule coming down that you've got to do this thing. You need to have a system that does this, or you need to have or maybe it's marketing. Maybe it's the marketing people that say, we need this to be competitive or whatever. And the person who really knows about it, who knows enough to be able to prioritize and give you requirements, doesn't care enough about doing it to be that constant point of contact and giving you what they need. And that's, we've seen that. We've seen that on government contracts. We've seen it on commercial contracts where you've got somebody and it's just their job. This is my job to do this. But I've also got 50 other jobs that I've got to do, and so I'll just do this when it makes sense for me, rather than really prioritizing it. So yeah, I don't know that you can say, hey, ultimately nobody cares about this, but you can say this. We need to talk to someone that cares. If the business, the organization, the government, whoever really wants this to get done, we need somebody involved who really is invested in what we're doing, what's going on.
And ideally, I think in a picture perfect world, that what you're talking about, the requirements would come from the person who really wants this piece of software to be built and is excited about it, and they want to do this and this and this, right? You don't have to go mine for the requirements or whatever. You've got somebody who's excited about what you're working on, that product owner who is, I want this and I do this and I have a vision for what I'm doing. And that's the real gem to get, right?
Yeah, that's when it's really fun.
Yeah.
That's true. It's always fun to help make someone's vision come to life, and then for it to be a very successful and useful thing. So you mentioned before, Nate, that it almost sounded bad to say getting requirements, right? And in Agile, we often call the manifestation of the requirements as stories or features. So story writing, what are some things that you guys suggest in terms of how to write good stories for Agile projects?
Well, I guess I'd start with don't try to write too much. Don't try to write every single thing that you know down and call that a story and hand it to a developer to do. In the spirit of what Matt was talking about earlier, just say what you need. Say enough that everybody can grasp what you're talking about, and it starts a conversation. Ron Jeffries talks about that all the time, about what you really want from a story is a prelude to a conversation, an excuse to go and talk to somebody about something, because as soon as you try to write down too much, you have just communicated to the developer that they don't need to talk to you, that they've got everything they need on that card, and they're just going to do what the card says, and they're going to allow that to be the limit of what they have to accomplish. And if you don't have that conversation, you're not going to be happy.
There's a certain amount of or a certain audience of people that I think feel that it's liberating in some way to just have a document handed to them, because then they don't have to talk to people, right? So I always think that the having the conversation part of Agile requirements is sometimes daunting for people, because they're so used to just getting that requirements document and being allowed to digest it and kind of mold it into what they want the software to ultimately become. But I think having those conversations, that's absolutely the best way to do it. And then, like Matt said, get just enough of what the story is, of what the feature is going to be, and start working on it, and then get that continuous feedback loop, right?
Yeah. And I think when you get to, like I said, the part of the audience that may want to be in their cave and have a document and have their headphones on and not come out for 6 months, like, I mean, some people you just aren't going to convert, right? Some people like rainy days and foggy mornings, like the sunshine just isn't their thing. But I think that, like DJ Lance Rock says, try it, you'll like it on Yo Gabba Gabba.
Wow, that is an arcane reference. I hope some people get that.
If they have kids, they'll get it. My kid has been watching.
There's
that.
a party in your tummy, right?
Right, there is. Yeah, thanks.
Hey, who is that? Who's that
Jason
talking?
Tice.
Jason Tice arrived. You guys all know we're from St. Louis. St. Louis has the world's worst traffic engineering. They need to think of it as a flow system. One light turns red, then one light turns green, the next one turns red.
That's convenient, isn't it?
So yes, yeah, it's very convenient. So the big enterprise has arrived and has listened to establish context about the requirements.
A pall came over the room as Big Enterprise.
Yes,
walked
big
in.
enterprise walked in the room.
It got dark and cold in here all of a sudden.
Yeah.
How's it going, Jason?
It's going well, and actually, I think I think the context we've set up here is it's indicative if we think about a lot of behavior. And I know in the past, in prior episodes, we've talked about behavior, and sometimes that's the forgotten element of a successful Agile practice. Whereby, to what John was talking about, there is a communication / conflict avoidance strategy that's employed by saying, we want to do a bunch of analysis up front, write down everything we think we need to know, and then go off in the closet, put the headphones on, and write code for 6 months. A lot of people, from a technical perspective, like that, and it's a function of the behaviors they prefer. But from that context, there's an element to say, well, there are ways to coach and to mentor. There's some thoughts about, can you change native behavior patterns? That's kind of an exploratory space. But you can definitely coach, and as a team, you can work to bring people in so they can effectively participate in a collaborative setting, even if they're not necessarily comfortable doing that. So for folks that say, hey, I need that level of detail so I can go off and do my work, if you're in an Agile setting, there are ways to get around that.
I think it's a constant push-pull with developers, even the ones that are engaged and fully on board with Agile, as to what's the right line and what's the right amount to put into the stories. Some people, some consulting that I've done, you get developers where they say it's too much content in the story, and then the other half of them say, oh, there's not enough. So it's this constant push and pull between what's the right amount of stuff to include in a user story.
Yeah, and in the same way that you said, some developers would rather just get everything written down and they can take the document and shut the door and not have to talk to anyone. I think on the same level, there are some customers who would rather create the document and feel like they got it all in. I've written everything down. There's no way that you're going to misunderstand, or there's no way that I'm going to forget to tell you something. I've gone around and I've talked to all these people and I've gotten it all down, and there's no way we're going to mess this up. When that's really that's the fiction, that you can write a document that everyone understands equally, and that completely encompasses everything that you were trying to do with your requirement or your story. And that's what you have to break people out of. But by the same token, when you have just a single sentence that represents your story, that it does leave a lot of room for holes and gaps and things that got left out or forgotten. How do you manage that? How do you deal with the fact that when I write a one sentence story and then I talk to you about it, and you take what I said and you go try to do it, that you might completely misunderstand what I said, or that I might have forgotten to tell you something.
Or that you realize you need to write 3 more sentences.
Right.
So, the challenge there from what you're talking about, Nate, is kind of the context that I had shared I was going to bring into this, is saying that if you are in a environment where your development capacity is either not empowered to have iterative feedback cycles or it's outsourced, how then do you convey the level of detail to effectively promote holding the folks that you outsource your development to accountable to deliver what they need to do? So if you're in an environment where you say you outsource your development, you hire contractors to do it, typical cycle time of a contract package is about a year. That's pretty much, most people do that as a function of the fiscal year.
Well, why a year though?
Because that's how my take on that is it stems back to how we manage it's really the tax cycle.
Just because there's a statement of work that says do something for us for a year doesn't mean they won't get any deliverables during that year. But some people may twist it into, I get one deliverable at the end of the year. Well,
or what it says is to effectively put this package out for acquisition so you can bid on the work. Here's what I want you to do. And knowing that the reason this is, I propose, an evolutionary space for Agile on the enterprise stage is to say that, okay, we tried to say we wrote a blank contract, say go do Agile development for a year and come back with something that meets our customer's expectation. Well, if you don't effectively socialize that construct through the enterprise, then, okay, Nate as a stakeholder says, that's awesome, you met my expectations, that's great. But then someone else like John comes in and says, guess what? I don't agree with that. So I'm not going to say you were successful. And then how do you accurately say you were successful and position yourself to recompete for new work? So the converse of that is saying we're going to do, a big design up front. We're going to think through, go through a traditional requirements lifecycle, think about all the different elements, and even going so far as there's some evolutionary efforts out there to actually write your stories for an entire product or an entire multiple release cycles in a vacuum, put that on a contract, and then go and do that work and hope that it lines up.
Well, that's exactly the manifestation of the fallacy that Nate was describing. That you can somehow perfectly describe, document, and explain to someone what the system should be and will do.
Yeah, and that's again totally against the impetus behind the manifesto, whereby we want to facilitate that iterative process whereby we can adjust and we can integrate lessons learned to move forward.
But not only against the manifesto, it's against common sense.
Well, it's common sense, but then when you have a legal contract that says thou shalt do X, Y, and Z, how does that, and has a cycle time of a year, how do you promote more flexibility in that construct? Obviously, the idea that's out there that there's been a lot of success with, more on the commercial side, not so much in government enterprises, because government enterprises are really focused on the way that their overarching budget is managed, but really saying that, okay, maybe we need shorter contracts. or a contract that has like optional task orders where you can fund different tasks based upon the additional information you learn as a project progresses.
Right, and that's definitely one way to do it. To try to scope down your contracts, just in the same way that you say this story is too big, let's break it down. But even that can have its own pitfalls, because you tend to the shorter it is, the more confident you tend to be in your estimate of how long it will take. And since estimates are always wrong, my experience is if you try to do a lot of little short contracts, then you never get a chance to make up for your wrongness. You tend to always be wrong in the small and lose out over and over and over again, rather than having a bigger effort where being wrong in one place is offset by being wrong in a good way in another place.
Yeah, well, and from the true enterprise viewpoint, if you ever also measure the efficiencies and cycle time of your contracting processes, you inevitably, with that approach, you incur more overhead.
Right.
Because you're constantly modding and
yes,
and the
no
poor
doubt.
people who always do that work, and in most enterprises that is always a bottleneck. Those poor people get worked to death and have a miserable life because of just constantly having to work through change cycles.
Right. Well, we've gotten off topic a little bit, but
sorry, the enterprise arrived.
Yeah, but I think the short answer, I think what you were trying to say is, how do you deal with the fact that these long-term efforts, that there's an expectation at the end of what's going to get done, and we've had this conversation on this podcast before. But I think what you have to do, the only way that seems to make sense, is the same way that you'd go through the Agile requirement process, which is that you start with some big overall objectives that you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah.
And then you break those down. You start with those big things. This is what this release is going to be, without totally understanding every aspect of what that means. And then you start breaking those down so that you're doing the most important stuff first, so that by the time you get to the end of your money or your deadline or whatever, you have done enough of each of your major objectives to be able to say those objectives are accomplished.
Yeah.
And make that your overall priority to make sure that you've accomplished those objectives enough by the time you get to the end.
And it's not enough to just to have set small goals and to break things down. You have to then continuously release software and gather feedback from the user so that you're constantly guiding the ship and the project and making sure that you are doing the most important next thing for the customer.
It's kind of amazing because it all just kind of fits together magically, right? We're talking about the product owner before, and now we're talking about the stories and what goes into a story. What you're really talking about, Nate, is the difference between a story, an MMF, a feature, an epic, right. Breaking the different grains of that work down. And for me, being a developer, my viewpoint is often on the story, right? I want a story that I can finish in a half a day to a day, is not going to take more than a couple check-ins to get through. But there still has to be a product owner or whoever it is, or the development team as a whole, saying, okay, we're doing stories X, Y, and Z. That completes, overarching story A, and that's feature B, that we're going up and down the chain of priority together. And without a strong product owner, like John said earlier, and without, development and a team focusing on those granular stories, it doesn't work, right? It's got to play together like a symphony. I mean, everybody's got to play just the right tune.
There's one thing that I think is a hole right now that seems like it's crying to be filled, and some people do it, and they just don't know. But it's this technical product vision / architecture.
I thought you were going to say roadmap, John.
That helps. It is the glue between the product vision held by the product owner. I want the application to do X, Y, and Z, right? And the developers who are doing the tactical story development, somebody has to be in there kind of helping weave things together to say, we're going to leverage a framework and we're going to do this and we're going to move in a certain way. Or maybe it just happens by accident. I don't know. What do you guys think?
So you're talking about the overarching architectural constructs whereby there are some decisions made to promote synergies between approaches.
Not necessarily that, and I don't want to get big architecture.
No, big architecture is not here.
Wrapped around my neck like a noose, but at least a vision of this is how everything fits together technically.
See, and I'll ask this, be that I was late. Have you guys got into the notion of how you take this requirements process to develop stories and then expand it across different teams who are working together to achieve a common goal?
No.
Okay, because that little enterprise, we'll call it little enterprise. Cause so you've got typical back office team and or back end team who does your services. You might have a front end team who does your application tier, and they need to integrate whereby they define stories that effectively define interface points, and then from a project management standpoint, work to a battle rhythm whereby they release MMFs when they make sense and they add value to the final product.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a different set of concerns there.
So, okay. I just didn't know if we'd scope
it sounds
that.
like, John, what you're talking about is in opposition to what Matt referred to earlier, where the customer just says, okay, I want a website, and so you give them a blank web page, and then I want a button, and that's kind of like where the team would know where are we going? Where is this going? How they're just building whatever they're told, and maybe that works, but it does seem like there's value in the team knowing what the end point is. Where are we headed with this, and what is it we're trying to accomplish, so that we can help you. We're not just robots doing whatever you tell us.
So we
can participate in the process.
So Nate, is that done criteria for a release? So going beyond if we are doing iterations, so here's our iterations, but when we get to that's because that's what it sounds like.
But there's even something beyond that, maybe. I mean, maybe it's a startup that says, here's how we're going to change the world. Here's our ultimate goal, but in order to do that, we've got this application we're going to build at the front end that maybe doesn't look like our end goal, but is going to get us there. A little like, if Google knew from the beginning that advertising was going to be the way they were going to make their money, but then they built a search engine. It's like, wait a minute, search engine advertising. You don't get it until you've really started to see the value over time. But if everybody knew, okay, here's our business goal, we're going to be the most successful advertising company in the world. I'm sure that they didn't know that. I'm just saying if that somehow you had this ultimate plan of where you were going, but maybe the pieces didn't tell you exactly what you were doing when you got there. Is that kind of what you mean?
Yeah, because I'm really torn about the conversation, because part of me feels like the purist Agile the Agile purist would say it'll grow organically, or we'll do it organically. We'll do just enough now, and then we'll refactor it later, and we won't, and we'll do our design when we refactor. But then there's and I agree with that to some extent. But there's also the other part of me that feels like someone needs to kind of have a 10,000 foot view vision, looking down the road, kind of feeling things out with the product owner about where things are going, how they're progressing, to help add some color for the developers when you're making technical decisions and you have questions, right? I mean, I hear Matt say, just give me one feature today, tell me to build that blank web page, and I'll do it. But then I've had experience with Matt where he's like, well, I don't know enough about what they're trying to accomplish to do this.
Oh, real Matt versus podcast Matt.
Yeah.
Well, I was about to say it's a situation-to-situation scenario. I've been on teams where, and my pick today, not to give it away, but to give it away, is about self-organizing teams. And I think that when you get in that sweet spot, and you don't have that person doing the 10,000 foot view, and it's the team's responsibility, and you've got a passionate product owner on the client side, and everyone is invested in the project, and everyone's excited about it. People, I've been on a team where 2 or 3 developers will come at the same time and say, hey, you know what? I had an idea. I think we should refactor this to use this framework or do this. And everybody kind of comes up with the idea at the same time. And then you go talk to the product owner or the client, and they're going, hey, you know what? I was going to mention that I wanted to move. My next feature was going to involve this, so that'll fit great, and things just magically line up. And I know that's not really fair. People just say it magically happens, but to steal Jason's fancy word, synergy, you can have that synergy with the team, and it just starts to work out. But conversely, you can be on teams, and where you were talking about, real Matt versus podcast Matt. Sometimes when you don't have that synergy in a team, and when there is not that open communication and that passionate kind of warm feeling, then you have to fall back on, I need more information because I don't have a vision of what the client wants. I don't have the understanding of what our goal is here. And without that, as a developer, I have to push for more details in my stories because I'm really pulling information from my environment around me when I don't need, with a smaller story and all this happy feeling stuff, I'm pulling information from all these other pieces. And without that, I have to require, I want more information.
And actually, Matt, that checks out because that's actually some of the folks who are leaning forward with figuring out how to do effective Agile acquisition packages and contracts, basically. What's unique is usually when a contract's led, it's typically a kind of a one-way street in terms of this is what I want you to do by employing you to do this work. And there's been some interesting things I've seen and they've been blogged about where a contract is more specific of defining roles and responsibilities for all parties involved. So yes, as the supplier, here's what you need to do X, Y, and Z. But even ideas leaning forward, and this is where I think, this is a Jason saying, where I think things are going, is to say there's a two-way street, and a contract needs to call out the roles and responsibilities for the folks who are going to be supporting the contract from the client. So hence you have to be involved in ongoing discussions and, effectively define the activities that the customers need to do to ensure Agile development is successful. Because a lot of times, in an acquisition environment, the reason why contracts are used is to outsource problems. And so, hey, I want to say, go solve my problem and, come back with a solution, and I really don't want to help you with it.
Hey, Jason. I'm not sure that everybody listening to this would know what you mean when you say acquisition.
So, yeah, acquisition, you're right. Very specific enterprise term. My bad. That's this notion of how to put together a contract, a way to do work. So,
right.
And obviously many of us work as consultants whereby, we're soliciting for work, looking to go help solve the problems of different organizations out there. And so there's a way that an organization would say, I want to bring in outside expertise and consultants to help solve that, versus a way that even within an organization, technically teams should have some type of a contract with whatever stakeholder or business unit they're working to support. And that contract, for the purpose of governance, should define some level of roles and responsibilities across the key people who support that endeavor. Thank you, Nate.
Thanks. Yes, so I appreciate that. Well, and I'm not totally sure if this fits with what Jason was saying. It does on some level, I think. But when Matt was talking about that, the customer or whoever, the product owner, providing some kind of context or idea of where you were going to a team, it makes me think of one of the original extreme programming principles that I always had a hard time as a team lead figuring out how to implement, which was the vision. One of those principles was to establish a vision for the team, so that and I think they talked about it as a metaphor.
System metaphors.
Right. So I always thought that would be really cool to have, but it was so hard to really come up with a metaphor for what you're doing. But if you have some goal or some shining star that everybody on the team can look at, and whenever they're getting confused or whenever they have two different paths they could take and trying to figure out which one they should go on, that seems like that would be incredibly helpful. Or if they see something and they just have to be reading something on their own and they see a tool, it's going to stick in their mind because that might have to do with accomplishing this ultimate vision. I think that'd be great.
I think metaphors are like pictures to people. So if I a picture is worth 1,000 words, and I think it's the same thing with a system metaphor, and I've employed system metaphors since the very beginning of my time doing Agile, and you can tell somebody, implement a star rating system like Amazon, right? And everybody immediately knows what that is. And so I think you can find all of these things in the wild that are metaphors for how things work. Maybe a Hungarian sort or this or that. There's these various metaphors that you can use that become crystal clear in people's minds when they think about that aspect of the system as Amazon star rating or whatever.
Yeah, so that's slightly different from what I was thinking it was, but
because Nate, you're thinking about like a project vision.
Yeah,
it's like what is our vision as a team, as a group,
exactly.
At the collaborative level.
So not giving everybody very specific direction on exactly what you're doing, but getting everyone on board with where this is ultimately going.
Yeah.
And what should everyone be trying to accomplish?
Yeah, and really more at the team level, more so at the product level.
And I'm going to jump back. I don't know if this is following what you were just saying, but one of the things too about the difference from a developer's point of view on the stories, right, and having that product vision, I think that you don't have to have the product vision as long as you have the communication. So thinking specifically about what John was talking about, a big difference is if I have a story that's very succinct and starts that discussion, but doesn't give me a lot of details, but I know as a developer I have confidence and believability that I'm going to be able to iterate with the product owner and pull out, talk to them and find out what that story really needs to do and what that means. I'm a lot more comfortable with a general or a vague story than if I don't have that confidence or that communication loop, right? That the ability to talk with a product owner somewhere and say, I'm going to turn this one sentence into this thing. Avoid ignoring any other hiccups that might come out of that we mentioned earlier. That gives me a lot more confidence than if there's not that feedback loop. You're going to need you help mitigate that lack of feedback loop by getting more specific stories, right?
Well, so here's an interesting example. I mean, in the pre-show, Jason, sorry you weren't here for some of the pre-show stuff, but a friend of the show, Amos King, stopped by and mentioned about, a requirements thing. And, if we had only known that we were going to have to support multiple languages, for instance, just made up front. If I only knew I had to support 2 languages when developing the application, I would have done things differently. But isn't that exactly the case that you're talking about, Matt? If I had more vision up front and knew I had other requirements, I could have done things differently. Well, really? I mean, how? Wouldn't you have done things the same way?
See, and John, that's the mindset of a lot of the stakeholders I deal with, where they want to do that analysis to think through all those things, and that's kind of to go full circle there. That's what we're exactly talking about, how to overcome that, because there's inherent risk and waste in that process, which is why I think Agile has been so successful. Now, how do you scale it? How do you do it in a regulatory environment? Those are all the exploratory areas, but I think there is potential to solve those problems.
And I think one of the discussions we've had off of podcast, off cast, well, I don't know what the right word is there. Anyway,
in real life,
outside the studio,
outside. Thank you. That's the term I was looking for. Real talk. Is that's where some of the best practices, solid principles, things like that come in. Is that as a developer down in the nitty gritty, when you have something and you want to add a second language, or you change directions, or you need to bring in this framework. If you've written code that's decoupled and dependency injected, and language dependent, obviously, but in a C#, C++ kind of world, if you're there's things you as a developer can do to mitigate major changes within the system, so that when you get to the point where you have to make a right-hand turn, it may be a big deal, but it's not an impossible deal. And so, without any direct judgment on your hypothetical scenario, I don't know. I got to say, hey, if there's this big problem, at some point somebody's got to say, well, did we implement this originally? Did we spend the time to refactor it? Did we follow through? Did we do all these things that I, as a developer, can do to avoid, getting SOL?
Well, at the same time, too, from the totally out of scope of this podcast, but the infamous top 10 reasons of why we do enterprise architecture, there is the need to confront reality and embrace it. And understand it's a two-way street. So there's roles for the team and there's roles for the customer. So what I've seen a lot of is where customers might have they don't have enough understanding to say that early on, because of what the direction you gave us and the stories we put on the board, assuming you're using a Kanban board, we made some decisions that you requested for the sake of the greater good and to put something out there that at that time met your needs. Well, guess what? Reality's changed, your needs have changed, and as a result, yes, we could have gone back and done that work early on if we had known about it, but at the same time, consider the net effect. You got your product to market faster and for less cost based upon your needs at that time. So now there's the need to go back and do the work and work through it. And what I've observed is a lot of times customers, especially from some of the data that's out there from analyst groups, they have unrealistic expectations about what the level of effort of those efforts should be, and they inject themselves too much into the teaming process to say, well, I don't agree with your assessment that that's going to take this much effort, and they think it will take less. And that's just where there's a communication challenge and a change management task to ensure that your customers have sufficient understanding so they understand and they give you the freedom and trust you to do the work that you need to do.
One of the things I think with Agile, and I agree.
But there's a strategy to avoid that sometimes. And I've seen teams where they don't ever even say, "Oh, I don't need to do that. I can keep the customer at bay," and that's never going to work out well.
When you're doing Agile, you have to. I think there's a certain commitment that you have to make that says, I'm going to be comfortable that there's ambiguity sometimes. And Nate, you use the term or the phrase, the last responsible moment, right? So when you're working on an Agile project, there's this cloud of war, and you only can see so far in the thick of the cloud of war, right? And as you move further down range on the project, you don't like cloud of war?
That's an interesting soundbite, John, but
It might be a show title.
I think that would be a great show title.
Fog of War, not Cloud of War. Thank you, Dr. Lee.
Play more Age of Empires.
We're trying to have a
war.
collaborative whole team approach, yet we're having a war.
There's a fog of war, and you can only see so far ahead, and the rest of it is kind of ambiguous, and it forms as you make it down the track. But there's a lot of people that don't ever get comfortable with any level of that ambiguity. They want very crisp, what they think is very crisp, detailed documentation about what to produce and how to produce it. And so I think that there's an upfront commitment that you have to be comfortable with some amount of ambiguity in an Agile project, right? What do you guys think?
So the one I'll throw out there that you're really close to, which was one of the things I thought I'd bring up today, which is not an enterprise viewpoint, is from the little, and I assume you'll put the invest metric out on the show notes since we kind of talked through it sounded like.
Yep. We didn't actually talk through it.
Oh, we haven't talked through it. Okay,
like to introduce it.
Well, so from the invest, we decided not to use it. My bad.
No. I said if you'd like to talk through it. Yeah.
Well, if we'd like to, but the thing that's interesting is nowhere in it does it talk about, you're saying comfortable, there doesn't talk about trust. And now, from the enterprise viewpoint, one element that why we have regulatory environments, it's inherently to say we don't trust you, and so
I don't trust you either. That's why I test what you give me.
Meaning, when you say that, John, you're saying you're the customer, or
sure.
You're the who?
Yeah, I'm the customer.
So I guess the big question I throw out there for us to think about is what is the role of trust, other than saying it's a prerequisite. Maybe that's all there is to say in an effective requirements management process.
I don't think that. Well, I mean, my opinion is trust does not have to be a prerequisite to doing.
And to play devil's advocate, I think what John was maybe trying to get at is that a lot of the stuff we do, we may all trust each other, and you tell me the sky's blue, but if I can't prove it to you, if I don't have tests around it, if I don't have UATs, whatever it is, that's the trust. The working product that meets the requirements and passes the test it's you're right. You have to trust each other. There's basic respect and business trust, all throughout the process. But from a client to developer point of view, I don't want you to trust me. I want you to double check what I'm doing. I want you to run my tests. I want you to make me prove that what I'm doing is what you want me to be doing.
Amen.
The main trust to me comes in the beginning of the project when you say, we're going to get this done for you, and we're going to do the most important things you want first, and we're always going to deliver you working software. And so let's get started. And the trust to be able to get started without a complete detailed plan and a commitment that I've signed that says I'm going to do every single one of these tiny little itsy bitsy things that you wrote down. Giving up that trust, that's the most important part of the process.
And that's the piece.
Here's how we create that trust is by me delivering you working software really quick.
Yeah.
It's a lot harder to trust me if I say, give me $1 million, I'm going to build you something, but I'll give it to you in 12 months.
Right.
Isn't it harder to trust somebody in that case?
Right, but you still have to take that step. You still have to take that step to start the process, to say, okay, you say you're going to give me working software. I haven't seen anything yet. We're at the very beginning, and I haven't told you everything that I want, but you say that's okay. So all right, let's do this. And yes, as it goes, I think that level of trust changes to, okay, yeah, I see they're going to give me delivering working software. And then I think what you said is very important. You almost want some level of not trusting, because you want the customer to go constantly evaluate what they've been given and make sure that is what they asked for and it works the way that they wanted. And we have seen projects fail because the customer trusted too much, because they thought that these are smart guys. they're giving me something that looks really cool week after week. It must be fine. I got other stuff to do. I'm not going to worry about testing it, and then find out at the end that it's a major failure.
Agree 100%. So I'm saying from a trust perspective, you only need the very basic amount. You only want the very basic amount of trust so that we agree we can do business together.
We can get started.
Beyond that, I want you to be skeptical as hell about what I'm doing and keep checking me on it.
That's great. I love that.
The only thing
That's
that
it.
Well, the only thing that I'm thinking about over here is there's a lot of human factors in that process for it to be successful. And so it gets back to scaling Agile. So especially scaling Agile in an environment where you have multiple stakeholders, because it's difficult and it's a challenge to earn that trust from a single stakeholder. But it's achievable. I think all of us in this room have done it on various occasions. But if you're in a more complex environment where you have different folks who have different thresholds and different criteria, what might work for Nate might not work for John. And so then it gets back to that initial scenario I brought up when I got here today, was this: how do you, in a large environment, and of course you can take it offline and say that, well, maybe one of the reasons why we're not well suited to do Agile right now is because our leadership structure and our stakeholders are too matrixed out. So there isn't that effectiveness where you're focusing your efforts on a single stakeholder or a small group of stakeholders. And if instead the environment's so widespread, then that's just not going to work, because you can't scale trust to that level. Or I have some exploratory thoughts from just this discussion about how do you scale trust, or is that even valid? Lee's smiling back there like that's some weird idea, but it's you can take a step back and say, hey, this project, in the eyes of one stakeholder was a complete success and they love it and they want more of it. But then all of those positive reviews that, would feed back into the story funnel to drive the next round of value add work are completely mitigated by someone who just doesn't agree. Yeah. But that's a function of the organization, and that's kind of dysfunctional. So
I'd like to go ahead, Nate.
I was just going to say, if we're moving on, I have a scenario, a real life scenario that we've encountered that I think is relevant.
Yeah, sure. We are moving on.
Okay, so what do you do in a situation where a customer comes to the kickoff meeting of a project that's supposed to be Agile, and they have got, somehow in the background, they have gathered a huge list of requirements? So this is not anything that was done during contract negotiation, or during the start of the process. It's just, okay, you said we'll get this done. We've got some overall goals. Great. By the way, I went and did all this interviewing and research, and I found out here's the list of all the stuff that we have to get done. Here's my list. And you look at the list, and yes, indeed, it's a lot of things that need to get done, but you also see very quickly that there are some things that are not on that list that are important. Where do you go from there? Is that a good situation that they've done all this work? Is that a bad situation? How do you proceed from there? Because we had a project that did that, and I'm not sure we made the right choices. I'm just interested in the feedback you guys have about where you go from there.
For the purpose of the scenario, what's your availability to work with the customer? Are they are you working on site with them, embedded? Are you remote?
The customer is remote, but fairly accessible. If you want to ask them things, they're fairly accessible. But the problem is that the customer, the reason they've gone and gathered all of that is because they are not the subject matter expert. They are the product owner. So they are responsible for getting this done, but they are not the expert on using the system. So they've gone and done all this research and gathered all these requirements from various people about, here's what I know the system needs to do before we're done.
Well, are they confirmed, or are these the things we think we might need to do, so we want to write them down and work through them in a logical decision process, or we've actually validated these for you?
Well, you don't know.
You don't know.
You don't
okay. Know. That's fun.
I think in my experience with this has been that you say, thank you very much. Good job. Nice work. You did really great on this. Turn around, pitch it in the garbage can. And
patronize the shit up.
Go to work on the real stuff.
Oh,
now,
but by the way, I have this Kanban board. You can log in and look at it, and the customer has the expectation they're going to see their stuff on your Kanban board. So how's that going to go over,
when I say pitch in the can, I mean you're gonna take it with a grain of salt, and you might say, well, let's pick one thing from this list and let's start there, and say we'll set the rest of it aside, and once we get through this one thing, then we'll come back to that list again. And ultimately, by the time you get to the second thing, they've completely forgotten about the list and are wrapped up in your Agile process just in time.
I would say that's pretty close to the approach that we took that did not work.
Interesting.
Really?
And the reason that it did not work is that this person had, and I need to be careful in case they listen to this podcast. This person had done a lot of work to get agreement on here are the things that needed to be done, and they were basically not willing to support a product that did not have this stuff in it to the wider people that were paying us. In other words, they would not say, yes, indeed, you are done. You may now consider yourself done, released from the contract. Here's your money. Until this list of things was done. I think we approached it with, okay, this is great. This is great guidelines, and we'll go and we'll refer to this if we once we start working on areas of the system, we can go back and use this as a reference and a guide and a conversation, but not take it too seriously. Then as the project went on, found out, no, this is really serious and they really want every single item in this list done.
I feel like that's a no-win situation because if you deliver exactly what's written on that,
then they're going to hate the product.
The 10 Commandments stone tablet that he hands you at the beginning of the project, then he says, this is exactly what I asked for but not what I wanted. And you have the actual reality that you ran into, which was you delivered something that didn't answer all the things that he said, and then as a gatekeeper, he didn't support it and made it a failure.
So I'm struggling, John, because you had rolled the clock back about 20 minutes. You had said you wanted criteria by which you could be held accountable, so you could be measured and your success could be demonstrated. So
I said those things?
More or less.
Rewind.
Can we get a fact check? Yeah.
Those are big enterprise words. Nate's describing a scenario where it sounds like you were given a very precise target to hit, which some could say could box you in, and defeat some of the innovation and the creative principles behind Agile.
Right.
But at the same time, if you want something to be held accountable for and to measure your success, you've got a great big list of criteria. Just go target, get those done, and call it a day. The idea I have that's a fusion of kind of Agile and that is saying, I'm trying to see if this was kind of, it's different from what you recommended. Take the list, say, awesome, I appreciate your effort, it's really cool. You must have some great enterprise architects that did a whole bunch of reviews and figured this all out for you. Yeah, whatever. Anyways, and say, okay, guess what, product owner, what comes first? So do your job, pick a few off the backlog, and we're going to keep this here, and we're going to start that, and let's see where it takes us. And effectively keep that as your backlog, but knowing that we're not going to take it and say it's the approved backlog. We're going to say it's the backlog that as we start this project and as we get smarter and as we document patterns and build reusable components in this application or whatever the context is, that it might demonstrate that we might not need some of these. And literally from a governance perspective over time, if you detect that you're in this kind of regulatory situation, I'm going to call this a regulatory situation, you would document the decisions made to a fair level of detail to say that, well, instead of doing this, we met this criteria with a common service that we built early on and we were just able to leverage.
I think we said the same things. You just used more words.
I think you did. You guys, you definitely used bigger words.
No, more words. More words.
More words. Oh, jeez.
My question then becomes, as like listeners out there who have a shop and they're trying to develop Agilely, is it better? I think where I see it leading is it better to develop in a no-win situation that ends up, is the money worth the damaged reputation or the delivering a bad product is really where you get stuck at, right? And it's good that I'm not in more of the business development stuff because I think I would a lot of times be like, nope. I'd throw them out.
And I think one possible answer, and we've talked about this now that it's after the fact, is to look at that and realize this is not an Agile project. We thought it was an Agile project. We thought that's what we signed up for. This is obviously not an Agile project, and we need to deal with it differently.
That self-actualization is, it's hard to say, no, we're going to turn the work away at the door, but it really comes down to how much do we believe in that and how committed are we to that's the way that we can do this the best.
Right.
And that's the way we're trained to do it.
So I think the key thing that I said that makes it not an Agile project was the fact that this person was not a user of the system. This is a product owner that had no stake in the system actually being something that they would use and love and be happy about every day.
Right.
Because all they had was a list that they had been told that they needed to accomplish, and that's all that was what they cared about, not the system being a great
and at
system.
that juncture,
Right.
I think they're even challenging the definition of what a product owner is, because that's just, you're a project manager. Hey, go get all this stuff done.
Right.
Is there in this scenario, was there a possibility of escalating that? I mean, always escalate, right? Was there a way anywhere to go above them?
The only place to go above them was to, as Jason said, acquisition to the people that had actually allowed the contract to be written in the first place.
And that's where, but to flush that one out, there are strategies to say, hey, we wrote a contract. It said do X, Y, and Z. Well, all of a sudden, Exhibit A showed up.
Right.
You can't, to make a sense, I think most people know I do work in the government sector. So to put that relevant to things for contracting Agile, the government can't let a contract to say go do Agile using these technologies and then say, oh, by the way, the contractor has to now go train people in all these technologies. They have to do that up front so the people who are bidding on the work can assert that they have the relevant skills. So you can't just say, I want to change that when you're within one of these cycles running. So the only one that I would throw out there just as a potential idea is saying that when you're in one of those theories, we say it's not Agile. Is it truly a lost cause? So is there any salvageable, in the spirit of promoting an understanding of the Agile principles, ways to salvage that?
I think what we could have done to possibly salvage it that we did not do was estimate every single thing on that list. On some level, even if it was t-shirt sizes, estimate everything on the list and use that as a way to say, if anything shows up that you think is important that's not on this list, here's what's going to happen to our timeline, our delivery schedule, so on. I think what we did instead was we took it kind of the way John said it at first is, that's nice that you came up with that list. That sounds really great. There's some interesting ideas there. Let's put that aside. Let's build your system. And that's the way we approached it. And then this list kept coming back into our meetings and oh yeah, that's interesting. How many of those have we done now? That's a nice demo that you guys did. Which items did we just do from the list that are on that demo? And if we had estimated everything, we could have at least, as we did things that they said they thought were important, that were either not on the list or on the list, shown a burn down, shown something that would allow us to negotiate. As it stood, when we finally realized what that list really was, it was too late to negotiate.
Yeah. Well, and see, what's interesting is, and what you're talking about is really getting to where, so from an architecture standpoint, from architecture frameworks, they always talk about change management. There's books and books about change management, and they say if you're doing architecture and you're not doing active change management as part of your architecture practice, you will fail. And I think what we're kind of getting to here, especially in the Agile space, is there's different tiers of communication that need to be emphasized. Much of our discussion tonight's been about the ongoing and iterative communication between the development team and the customer of the software being developed. But for that to be successful, especially in a larger setting, there is the need to integrate that tactical level communication, since it's customer to team, with the overarching communication that speaks to the other stakeholders and the folks in the boardroom and all the other people who are ultimately going to measure success. And if you're doing work and you can't go out and figure out how you fit into that strategy, you should acknowledge that you might be operating at some risk.
So, Nate, I think the situation you described is a really tough one because it almost ended up being a little bit of a bait and switch. You had one understanding up front, then they come in later with this list, and you're kind of already through the upfront acquisition process. Contracting, yeah. For Star Trek fans out there, I almost think that this is like your Kobayashi Maru. It was just a no-win situation. At that point, you were kind of already committed and stuck.
Well, I don't want to make it sound like we were dealing with unreasonable people. We were dealing with people who felt like they had a job and they really believed that this list was part of their job. So it's not. And no one was evil. People were doing what they needed to do. I think we did not understand what that list was, and I'm just giving this as a cautionary tale to anyone listening. If this happens to you, make sure you understand what that list is and deal with how the project could run. So you say bait and switch. I don't think that's what it was, because I really think the customer thought they were doing something good by going out and researching and finding out all this stuff. But we just didn't understand their relationship to that list of things.
They were being pretty serious, and we thought they were just being helpful.
So
Right.
The change management strategy that's been tested and has proven to be effective in those types of scenarios is what they call a draw-in, whereby you've received this information. You don't have any context to where it came from. Is it valid? Is it a distraction? So the challenge, and Agile is well suited to do this as a series of practices. Draw them in. Say, okay, we got that. Well, we need tests. Actually, if you're at the level where you can do where your customer writes the tests, have them actually help write the tests for those things, and in doing so, that might help flush out or as the team provide more context about where this came from.
Yeah, we tried that.
Oh, it didn't work. Okay, sorry. Crazy idea.
It's a great idea.
This was
It might not. For that,
we should move on. I think that was helpful.
It was nice to have a concrete example to kind of theorize about and talk about it, and that actually brings us just about to the end of our time here tonight. So we didn't really get to everything, but I think we touched on quite a number of things. We talked about who's involved with requirements, talked a little bit about some of the hierarchy, who's involved with collecting requirements and writing user stories, some about the prioritization, and even a little about delivery and accepting stories. So I think we touched on a lot of things. I mean, there's still more that we could talk about in future episodes related to Agile requirements. So let's go ahead and do our picks. And Jason, we'll let you go first, since as like a penalty box sort of thing for being a little late.
Well, you mentioned Amos made a cameo tonight at the pre-show, so Amos isn't here tonight.
He was looking to give you a big hug right before the show started.
He was. Did you see the notes? So I have a pick for Amos because Amos loves to talk about me architecting my children's life, or the life of my children, which we'll figure out if I'm really doing that or not. But I do like time boxes. So this is the blog I need to write. So it's not cited, but so we're using time boxing to solicit successful potty training.
This is a real thing you're doing.
This is a real thing because if you share notes, and I know a lot of the organizations that some of us work in, I have lots of people having kids. If you don't do that, you will find yourself spending your waking hours of the day in the restroom trying to encourage your children to use the facility.
And if you don't do that, you'll spend your day cleaning up puddles on the floor.
Yes. So we thanks to the marvelous technology called iTunes and the genius, it randomly selected a song, which it happened once, and it has now become the potty song. But it means anytime we're going to do the bathroom drill, it will never take more than 4 minutes and 32 seconds. It's very effective, actually. So free advice if you have kids.
Does that count though? If the potty's working, it's just a protracted event. Do you got to cut it off at 4 minutes 32 seconds?
We're not talking about you using the bathroom.
What I will share in terms of again, I've been doing a lot of research lately about behavior and how behavior applies to Agile teams and for other work, and it's inspired by watching kids learn behavior patterns. So what's amazing is we did this pattern once before our older child had any context, and it has never not been successful. So my daughter always respects the time box, and she is. I mean, I think she'll challenge it one day, but for now she's followed the guidance.
I'm not sure I totally understand, but I don't know if I should ask more questions or not.
I think maybe offline.
We'll take that offline.
Everybody wants to.
Maybe an interesting post.
Maybe I'll look
time
forward
box
to the
potty training for your kids.
Okay,
period.
We'll
Done.
look for the blog post.
I can't wait for it to show up in Dr. Spock's guide to raising children.
Scrumfamily.org, not my website. I want to be a content provider for them.
Hey, Matt Corwell, what are your picks, man?
Mine are not quite as entertaining as that. I mentioned several times during the show about the magic synergy of the team working together. And my first pick is Scrum Alliance article about self-organizing teams, kind of how you get to that point of that magical synergy stuff. And the other one is just something neat I found in the last couple of days. Not quite Agile, but definitely for anybody out there in the C# domain, is a framework for real-time events, web events called SignalR. It's an interesting little framework. It will work with the new WebSockets, which IE doesn't support until 10 or something. But long polling, a couple different, Facebook-style notification things to build into, like, say you're developing a RESTful API in C# that's supporting an iOS front end or an Android front end. Might be really useful for you.
Is it SignalR or Signaler?
I missed a lot of second grade, so my phonetics aren't real great.
I figured they were being all Web 2.0 and just leaving the last E out.
They probably.
There's just no more URLs, right?
Today
Yeah,
I was
I
in a
know.
debate about if the Department of Defense is D, lowercase d, or uppercase, or all uppercase. And it went on
D,
for
lowercase o, uppercase D.
Yeah.
Or all.
Yeah, it looks much
and
nicer.
it went on for
like
45
DoD.
minutes. We don't need to have that discussion.
Yeah. Okay. So anyway, those are my picks.
Nate, what's your pick tonight?
I am working on an Agile overview class that we're going to be teaching locally, and part of that class includes, and I'm going to mispronounce this, I'm sure, but it's Cynefin, I believe. It's spelled Cynefin. It's a Welsh word. It's a description of various kinds of processes, and it's a way of understanding your processes and your situations to help you know what tools to apply. So you can have a simple process, you can have a complex process, it goes all the way up to chaotic. So different kinds of situations put you in different kinds of process structures. And it's very interesting. There's a great video that you can watch by Dave Snowden, who's very entertaining to watch. And he describes how all these processes work. And it's cool. It's a cool way to introduce Agile to say, here's a way, here's some tools that can get you from, complex or chaotic processes back to simple processes. Or at least get in the realm of those, because ultimately simple is going to give you predictable capabilities. So anyway, something people can read up on and watch the video on.
It's nice to finally hear somebody try and pronounce this word, because for the last couple of months I think I've been calling it Cynefin.
Cinnamon?
No, don't get
And I
hungry.
may not have pronounced it correctly. But
Oh, I think you did. I looked at the Wikipedia page.
Yes, that's correct.
That looks right. Good one. I have two picks. My first pick is in the spirit of Agile requirements that we're talking about tonight. I found on YouTube a set of what they call the User Stories Resource Kit from Rally Software. And they've put together, 4 or 5 short, I think 3 or 4 or 5 minute videos on doing user story sort of stuff. And then I didn't include the link for this one, but they also have one that you can find on your own that's like an hour long, and it's a whole webinar on doing user stories with Agile. And then it goes, of course, into some of their tool, their Rally Soft tool.
Buy our stuff.
Yeah, of course. I mean, but it's a commercial with some good information in it. So check that out. The other thing,
To say like a 99-cent Big Mac?
hey, we don't advertise for McDonald's on this station, man.
Eat our food.
Speaking of
eat
McDonald's,
our food.
my second pick is not McDonald's, but is the Fitbit, and not so much for you to go out and buy a Fitbit, and unless you want to, but I'm on this weight loss kick and have been for a while, and can always use more people to have taunt me on Fitbit.com. And
Did that work?
Even though taunting still doesn't seem to work.
Yeah, I've taunted John multiple times on Fitbit lately, and nothing happened. So I had to resort to real life taunting. Not nearly as fun.
Hey, John, you want to make a cameo on a fitness podcast?
Sure, but absolutely.
Taunting doesn't work. We'll talk
If,
about why.
If anybody wants to friend me on Fitbit and help motivate me, that'd be cool. So let me know.
If you find him, you can find me.
Yeah. That's right. You can join me and Matt. So that's my picks. That's it, guys. That's all we have time for tonight. I'd like to thank our audio engineer, Dr. Lee McCauley, for doing all the audio work tonight. And I'd like to thank Adamax for a lot of the audio equipment that we're actually using here tonight. Rich Johnson for our intro music. Dan Schwabe for our outro music. And I'd like to thank each of my hosts. Matt, thanks for being here. Where can people find out more about you, man?
Matt Corwell. I think it's at Matt Corwell Twitter. I think.
Are you sure? You said you tweeted right before tonight.
I did tweet.
I mean, you used a different word, but
I'm pretty sure it's
I
at Matt
wonder what
Corwell.
the word was.
we'll
Yeah.
tell Jason offline because we don't want the explicit tag. We've avoided the explicit tag tonight since Amos hasn't been here. So
That's where you can find me, Matt Corwell.
We need monitors outside the window there. That way he can
Yeah.
hear what we're talking about.
Oh, we heard.
Nate, where can people find out more about you?
Well, I try to keep very private, so you can't find anything out about. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
No, I do have a Twitter account that I try to not be too annoying on. That's at Nate Mackey, spelled MCKIE, and I think you can probably find a bio of me on asynchrony.com. ASYNCHRONY.com.
Yeah, website looks great. New website, asynchrony website, awesome.
Thank you.
Nice mobile, responsive design and everything.
I know. Isn't that great?
Yeah, cool.
And you know, that website happens to talk a lot about enterprise architecture too, John.
That's unfortunate. Jason
Oh,
Tice,
jeez.
where can people find out more about you, man?
I'm lost in a big enterprise somewhere trying to find my way. But I'm sometimes on Twitter at Tice Thoughts. Yeah, at Tice Thoughts. That's
awesome. And you guys can find out more about me at my website, johnsextro.com, and you can follow me on Twitter as well at jcsextro. Thanks for listening. Be sure to check out our website at thisagilelife.com to find the show notes for this podcast, and keep living this agile life.